let's kick into things. Kia ora koutou, lovely to see you all on this wonderful Wednesday afternoon. I'm coming to you live today from the Te Wanganui Atara down in Wellington. I left the tropical humidity of Auckland for a blustery grey Wellington day, so I feel like I've been a bit shortchanged there, but that's all cool. I'm hoping that you can see and hear me. It's just a little bit longer to get our tech setup sorted today. So if you can see and hear me, that's great. If you can't, drop me a message. I'll see if we can do some troubleshooting. Otherwise, we'll kick into things. So today's webinar is about effective employee onboarding. It is the first webinar we have done in 2025. So it's very much too late to say Happy New Year, but I hope that your year has started off well anyway. I'm going to quickly share my screen and then we will crack into things today. Martin is saying you can see and hear me perfectly. Fabulous. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate you confirming. Let me just jump in and get this going. So while I have the screen up and the screen sharing, I can't see your questions as they come through. But what I will do is I'll jump in every now and again just to check if anyone has any issues with the tech, and we can get ourselves sorted from there. So, phone's on mute. I need to eat my dog food and do what I say I will do. Let us crack into things. So just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping with our webinars, as we always do. Questions are very welcome. These sessions really come alive when I know what it is that you're keen to understand or what questions you might have about what we're talking about. So use the chat function or the Q&A function, depending on what you have access to pop your questions in. What I will do is collate them all at the end of the webinar and go through them then all at once, which just kind of means I can keep us to time and I don't lose track of where it is that we're kind of in the session today. So questions super welcome. I'll ask them all at the end. And if you don't have any questions, it's fine as well. A recording of this webinar will be available after this session. That's pretty familiar to anyone who's joined us for a webinar before. What this does mean is if you are asking questions which are confidential, or maybe you want to ask them anonymously, make sure you hit that anonymous button and don't use anyone's names or place of employment in your question. If I do get asked any of those questions, I will do my best to scrub the identifying data and answer it anonymously. But there will be a recording of the session, including the Q&A, available for people later on. So if there's anything you would like not to be on the public record, don't mention it in your question. As always, keep today's discussions confidential. Sometimes I will use examples, again, anonymously, but I'm obviously drawing on my experience as an HR practitioner. And often from our audience, we will get questions where they are asking about situations that might be a little bit delicate or a little bit confidential. So if I see any of this on Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok later on, we might have a conversation. You're super welcome to take notes. Again, a recording will be available, but just make sure that anything we do discuss today doesn't go any further than that. Now, it wouldn't be an HR situation or an HR session, I should say, without a bit of an icebreaker. So what I would love to hear from you is what you were hoping to get out of the session. What made you want to come along today? The reason that's useful is I can then spend a bit more time on the sections I know are going to be of most interest to you. I can use examples and stories that I know are going to be relevant to your concerns or to what it is you want to understand. So to give you a second before I ask you to pop that into the question box, I will firstly jump through what to expect from today's session, and then we'll come back around to that again in a sec, and I'll go through and see what brought some of you here to join us today. So first things first, we'll do a bit of a legal update. There have been some employment law changes over the last couple of years, and particularly looking ahead to 2025, there are a raft of proposed changes that the government has signalled or that are currently working their way through the select committee process. So I'll give you a bit of an update on what's been happening there. And then we'll jump into talking about onboarding. So we'll go through the 4 Cs model. We'll spend some time talking about each of the 4 Cs, so compliance, connection, clarification, and culture. We'll look at what's different about remote onboarding. We'll spend some time thinking about how tech can make onboarding more useful for us with a demo of our onboarding module. And as I signaled earlier, we will end with questions. So if that's not what you were expecting today, you are welcome to log off and come back into your afternoon. But assuming that is what all 117 of you are here to be talking about today, you are certainly in the right place. So, let's jump back into our icebreaker with what it is you're hoping to get out of this session. And I'm going to jump in and just have a look at the chat or the questions and see what people are saying. Anonymous asks, is this webinar good for onboarding contractors? Yes, I would say that it is. There are some principles that relate to bringing new people into your organization, regardless of what their employment status is. However, some of the conversation we have around connection and culture in particular may not be as relevant to contractors, but overall, I think you'll still find some useful lessons here. Anonymous says they're interested in how technology can help induction processes. Fabulous. We're definitely going to be covering that up today. Thank you, Anonymous. Laurie, kia ora Laurie, thanks for coming along, says that they are interested in the measuring success bit in the engagement piece. So how do you measure success in onboarding? Thank you, Laurie. Great to have you with us. Kate says, keen to know more about great onboarding processes. Wendy wants to know about how to plan the process so I can keep track of things. Wendy, again, will have a really good, I'll show you what the MyHR platform can do towards the end to give you a sense of what that looks like, and there'll be some stuff in our bonus resources you might be interested in. Jenny, kia ora Jenny, nice to see you again, says that they would like to learn about being compliant, and also we're doing the best to set up our team to succeed. Greg is hiring a staff member shortly, so just wants a recap. Hester is keen to streamline their onboarding processes, and then some general comments around making sure to get the most out of the onboarding process, relationship building with new starters, and learning what, kind of the best way they can do things. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. I wasn't able to get to everyone's comments because I had more than I expected. So thank you to all the extroverts and brave introverts who submitted their comments there. We'll get into our content now, but I think today's the session where you'll be getting in touch with a lot of that content. So I'm confident there'll be something useful for you here today. So let's jump back into our flow. Now, this, of course, is the slide that my sales and marketing team are very keen for me to include. So if you know who MyHR is and you're a current client of ours, you're welcome to get a cup of tea or check your text messages for a second. But for those of us who don't know us, MyHR was established in 2013 with the goal of making HR easy. So our co-founders are Sean, who's our small business marketing guy, and Jason, who's our HR guru. They are friends from way, way back. They grew up together in Piha. They were surfers. They played in a punk band together. They were best mates, and Sean was finding it really hard to find useful kind of accessible HR advice when he was running small businesses. And so Jason drew on his expertise of delivering HR, kind of meaningful HR support at scale. So organizations like Henkel and Shell, Sky City, Dick Smith Electronics when it was around, Woolworths in Australia, to figure out how it would be possible to deliver HR services to small businesses in a way that didn't break the bank. And in 2013, MyHR was born. So we're an outsourced HR provider covering all employment matters. That's everything from onboarding, which we're obviously talking about today, through to performance reviews, documentation, policies, making sure that you've got all your documents ticked off and signed, so all of that compliance, business as usual stuff, through to what I think of as the pointy end of HR. So disciplinaries, restructuring, trial period terminations, termination for medical incapacity, all of the weird and wonderful ways that humans sometimes are not the best fit for their job or for the business. So there's not a lot that we haven't seen. To give you a sense of scale, we're doing about 420 employment agreements a week for our clients at the moment. We're doing about 18 to 20 restructures a week and between 35 and 40 disciplinaries a week. So we're working at pace and at volume, which means that when we talk about kind of onboarding and talk about these processes and practices, we're drawing on some pretty broad experience from a very broad client base, which means often there will be something useful that everyone can take out of these conversations. Now, the way that we deliver our services is a little bit unusual. So we have an HR platform which is supported by AI. It's our proprietary LLM model, which obviously we've got very, very closely locked down for reasons of privacy and security. And the platform is your source of HR truth. If you think of it as your digital filing cabinet, it's where all of your employment records and documents live. So each of your employees has a profile, their employment records live there. You can take notes on their file. You can run performance reviews and onboarding, all of your HR processes. It all lives in the platform. The platform is backed by expert human advisory services. So a team of people like me, some taller, some shorter, some have come from public sector, some from private sector, but we are there to be your HR team at a bit of a distance. So you can call us up, you can ask us questions. If there are documents you need written, we're writing letters for you. We're giving you bullet points to have a tough conversation with one of your staff. We're writing all of your employment agreements. We really are your outsourced HR function. We're just not physically in the business with you. Excitingly, we are a global business. So we have offices in Auckland, in Christchurch, Sydney, and in Vancouver as of last year. So our New Zealand clients are supported by our New Zealand HR team. You will never call us up at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday and have a sleepy Canadian accent on the other line of the phone. You're supported by your local HR experts, and the same for Sydney and Canada. So we're supporting clients with HR expertise located on the ground in those different countries. In terms of who we work with, our clients range in size. Our largest is Resine Paints with about 760 employees at the moment. Other brands you would recognise include ITM, Hal Pizza, the Breast Cancer Foundation, Blunt Umbrellas, Kiwis for Kiwi, a whole bunch of different sporting organisations. So there's not a lot that we haven't seen when we have clients who vary from manufacturing to trades to professional services to distribution to food and hospitality. We do quite a lot of work across all of those different industries. Our smallest client has 1 employee, so she's very keen. She likes to cross her T's and dot her I's, but the goal is to be making HR services really accessible to small businesses so that you can act with confidence and feel empowered to deal with problems or deal with documentation as you need to. And critical to that confidence is the way that our billing works. So we have no lock-in contracts. We're a software as a service business, so you have a monthly subscription fee, which is based on your head count. So a business of 10 employees would pay $2.95 a month, and maybe they call us 3 times a day in February because Sylvie lost her temper and punched a colleague, and then they've got a PG that someone raised about something that happened 6 months ago. So you're on the phone to us a lot. And then maybe in March, you might call us once to ask a question about Easter coming up in April. Your billing doesn't change. We don't want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We want to be the fence at the top. And if you're worried about getting a bill in 6-minute increments every time you get in touch, it makes it hard for us to do our job. Enough about us. Let's jump into our legal update. So a few things are going on in employment law, and I wanted to cover off a few things that happened last year and in 2023 just to make sure you're across those changes. So first is that personal grievances on the grounds of sexual harassment can now be raised within 12 months after the incident or incidents occurred. It used to be a 90-day window like all other PG types. Now it's 12 months. All other PGs remain 90 days. It hasn't changed. And if you didn't update your employment agreements at the time, you'll need to go through and update them with this change now. Sometimes when the law changes, we aren't required to update our documents because the law applies regardless of what's written in the employment agreement. But with this particular change, we were required to go through and update our employment agreements. So if you haven't done that already, make that something to do on your to-do list before the end of the financial year. Quite popularly, trial periods are back. Hopefully everyone knows about this. It got a lot of coverage at the time, but the businesses of all sizes can use trial periods again. So the previous government capped them at 19 employees or fewer. If you had 19 employees or fewer in your business, you could use trial periods, but anyone bigger than that couldn't. It was either the 23rd or the 24th of December when this law change came in. Thank you, Parliament. So we had a very busy Christmas period that year, kind of updating the changes and working through them with our clients. To give you a sense of change, at the time, about 1,300 businesses in New Zealand that we supported, only 1 chose to stay using probationary periods, and about 6 months later, they flipped back to using trial periods. So if you don't use trial periods, or if you thought you couldn't, be aware that you can now. And if you're a client of ours, again, feel free to get in touch and we can talk about what we might need to do there to support you. There's also been a bunch of Holidays Act reform put on the back burner. So the previous government did a bunch of consultation with kind of cross-industry groups and with cross-party support. The Holidays Act is a notoriously difficult piece of legislation to apply. Anyone who's ever tried to manage public holiday payments or staff who don't work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday will know this. And they completed, the current government completed some targeted closed-door consultation in December of last year. The feedback from that consultation broadly was that the proposed changes were going to make it harder to implement the law, not easier. So the government has decided to pause on the draft bill that they were consulting on. They're going to go back to the drawing board, do some more policy work, and the aim is to introduce and pass the bill before the end of their term, which would be next year. I mean, I'm in Wellington, the home of government in New Zealand. I'll believe it when I see it, with all due respect. I've been promised Holidays Act reform for as long as I've been working in HR, and I haven't seen it yet. So no action required, just a heads up that work is ongoing, but no changes expected this year. Now, there are a raft of proposed changes coming this year on other matters. So again, these haven't happened yet. I just want to give you a heads up that they're coming so you can start thinking about how that might affect your business. And we have plenty of resources and material on our website talking about each of these in more detail. And if and when they do come into effect, we'll obviously be communicating with our clients and doing a bit of work around them at the time as well. So the first of these is there is a bill that's currently at Select Committee, so it passed its first reading in the House, that says that employees can safely discuss their pay at work, and that if the employer takes adverse action, I think is the language of the bill, against that employee for discussing their pay at work, the employee now has a special personal grievance type to take against their employer for basically retaliating against them for discussing their pay. The purpose of this bill is to reduce the wage gap, is kind of one of the primary objectives. The wage gap's about 9% between men and women in New Zealand. For Māori, Pacifica women and women of colour, that discrepancy gets worse. And there are some other kind of policy reasons why being able to talk about your pay at work helps employees, as opposed to the asymmetric information that often accompanies kind of negotiations around salary and pay. So that's at Select Committee at the moment. We'll see how it proceeds, but it means that any clauses in your employment agreements which say pay is confidential, you can't discuss it at work, won't be able to be enforced, even if they're in writing. And if the employer does try to do something to kind of punish the employee for talking about things, the employee has a special PG category that they can pursue. The next one is this protected discussions piece. So at the moment, if there is a dispute, an employer and employee can have a conversation that's off the record or it's without prejudice to say, this is really shit and not working. Can we come to an agreement about what happens next? Often that will involve an exit from the business and typically a payment from the employer to the employee. This bill would mean that that first requirement, that there is a dispute, isn't in place anymore. So an employer, for any reason, could go to an employee and say, hey, I'd like to have a protected discussion with you about your employment. And if that discussion goes ahead, whatever's discussed there can't be used against the employer in the future, and the employee can't raise a personal grievance kind of related to actions coming out of that. So that would be quite a big change. I'm keeping a very close eye on this. I'm keen to see how it unfolds in terms of the wording of the law. So again, we'll keep you posted as this makes its way through the process. Some of the other headline grabbers lately have been that anyone who earns over $180,000 a year may not be able to raise an unjustified dismissal personal grievance. Australia has something similar. I don't know if their cap is 180K, it might be a little bit higher, but basically the idea being that if you earn significant amounts of money, you are probably in a senior enough position in any business that if you suck at your job or if you behave badly, it has very significant ripple effects and consequences throughout the rest of the business. And so your employer, to compensate for that additional kind of power or significance or kind of far-reaching consequences of how that employee performs or behaves, to balance that, the employer will have a bit more leeway around how they manage those employees. And if there is a dismissal process, then that employee can't raise a PG for dismissal. Employees in that category would still have access to PGs for other reasons. Again, we'll see how this kind of shapes out, but it will be an interesting change, and certainly the first time that I'm aware of since trial periods were introduced that a particular category of employee did not have access to their full range of legal remedies under employment law in New Zealand. A couple of other proposed changes: if the employer makes a misstep during a disciplinary or a restructure or a termination process, as long as that didn't materially disadvantage the employee is less likely to win a personal grievance. At the moment, the courts very carefully consider whether there was good reason for the employer to do the thing they did, whether that was restructuring or a termination process, and also did they follow a fair process when managing the thing that they chose to do. And those are equally important. Most of the PGs that we see succeed are because there were failures in the process or in the procedure. And so this bill is intended to reduce the chance of an employee getting a payout or being rewarded when the employer was still acting fairly and reasonably, but just made some minor missteps along the way. Employees who do anything to obstruct a dismissal process will be less likely to win a PG related to that disciplinary process. What obstruct looks like, kind of TBC, we'll see how that gets backed up. Employees who contribute to the reason they were being fired. So if they were the dickhead in the situation and then their employer terminated them, if their actions or behavior or choices contributed to the situation which resulted in them being fired, that will, in the new law, drastically reduce how much money they might get paid, and would also prevent the Employment Relations Authority or the Employment Court from ordering reinstatement as a remedy to their PG. Reinstatement's pretty uncommon anyway. It's not something the Employment Relations Authority does. Typically, by the time there's a PG on the table, the relationship's pretty fundamentally broken down anyway. So not something that we see a lot of, but the significant reduction in the value of payments will be interesting to keep an eye on. And lastly, employees who commit serious misconduct will not have access to any financial remedies. So if you were caught on CCTV footage putting your sticky hands in the till and taking $200 out and stealing from your employer, even if your employer fired you in the most egregious, kind of lacking in process way possible, the fact that you started it because you did the bad thing first means that you won't have access to any remedies or to any financial compensation if there's a serious misconduct issue going on. So quite a few changes to wrap your head around there. Again, none of these are in place, at the moment, so nothing for you to change doing right now. But if you do want to have a look at more detail here, jump onto the myhr.works/resources site, myhr.works/resources. We have a number of blogs and opinion pieces there about these different pieces of law, and they're getting a fair bit of media attention too, so we'll keep you posted as they evolve. Alrighty, let's jump into onboarding, which is the reason we're all here today. So onboarding matters because it happens whether you pay attention to it or not. Now, onboarding refers to the process and time frame in which a new person is joining your business or joining your organization. That could be as a contractor, it could be as an employee. Maybe they are returning to you, having not worked for you for a while. Maybe they're a brand new person. But it's the process and the time frame sort of that is someone's first experience of working with you. The onboarding timeframe typically lasts between kind of 8 weeks and 4 months, so 2 and 4 months. 3 months is pretty typical because it aligns with the 90-day trial period we have access to. It's unusual to find places where onboarding is less than 4 weeks because that's if you're working full-time, that's sort of 20 working days for someone to get their head around a new role and a new environment, which isn't very long. But the length of time your onboarding will be depends on how complicated the role is and what the needs of the business are. Now, a good onboarding process to begin with manages legal risk and liability. If you don't have an employee sign your health and safety policy and they then do something really dumb that the health and safety policy tells them they shouldn't have done, that means that you have not met your obligations as an employer under the Health and Safety at Work Act to make sure everyone's aware of hazards and what needs to be done at work. So there's a legal risk liability piece which we can't ignore. On a more personable, kind of interpersonal side of things, it also reduces stress and uncertainty. I don't know when the last time was that you started a new job, but there's a lot to get your head around. It's, who's who in the zoo, it's what's the car parking situation like, what are the good lunch spots kind of locally, who's in my team, what's the work, who are the clients, what am I expected to do, who are the stakeholders, who are the people in the office I need to be a bit wary of because they might be a bit odd, who are the people who are going to be really helpful. It's a lot of information to take in. So making sure that information is learned or at least delivered in a structured manner is going to make it a lot more comfortable for your new starters and going to mean that they have an easier time at work and can crack into things and start contributing earlier. Good onboarding, interestingly, also improves employee retention. I think that's pretty logical. Anyone who has a good first experience in a role is likely to stick around. Someone who gets shoved in a corner with a laptop told to figure it out and you'll see them in 12 weeks is not going to have a very good time and might be looking for another opportunity quite soon. But we know that structured employee onboarding can improve employee retention by 82%. Recruiting is a pain in the ass, frankly. It's a dark art. It's not a science. It's quite expensive and it's time consuming. So any low-hanging fruit to reduce the chances of having to go to market to replace someone when you didn't have to is going to be a really, really good return on investment in terms of your time and your energy, because front-loading a bit of work to put some thought into your onboarding process, make sure your documents are all in place, book those regular catch-ups, make sure they get a chance to meet all of the team, are going to mean that you have a much higher likelihood of them sticking around than otherwise. And we also know there's some increased job satisfaction, which I will talk about in a second, with some effective onboarding. Onboarding includes broadly kind of 4 categories of stuff that happens. And the first is compliance, right? So making sure your policies are signed, giving them access to tools and systems, making sure they're getting paid on time. Then there's the clarification piece, what's expected of them, what's in the job description, what are your expectations of them during this onboarding period, and more broadly, what are your expectations of them in the role as they go forward past their onboarding program. Connection is also critically important. So it's your who's who, connections to people they might need to be aware of, and the team's ways of working. And then culture is the way we do things around here. So our company values, who we are, maybe a bit of background as to why the business does the way it does, or is the way it is, I should say, but also just kind of anything else that might come up in terms of things they need to be aware of around drinks and things that are going to be, make them a social pariah, or missteps they might not be aware of. We'll start with compliance, and sometimes we talk about this as the boring stuff that needs to happen. Obviously, I work in HR. I don't think it's boring necessarily, but it's certainly not the most exciting part of your onboarding process. So this includes things like making sure you have their pay and KiwiSaver and IRD details so you can pay them correctly and on time. Making sure they have the right tools to do the job. If they need a login to Gmail, that they have that. If they need to be able to get access to a Miro board or a Trello board, that they can do that. All of those different tools and bits and pieces, let alone making sure that they have the correct PPE and health and safety equipment if needed. It's where the kitchen is, making sure that your policies and processes are documented, any laptops or phones that you've given them are recorded so you know where everything is, who the person's manager and team are, all of that kind of basic stuff. So most of the time I find businesses tend to be pretty good at this stuff. Even if it's a bit disorganized, it's pretty clear what needs to happen in terms of the literal basics and fundamentals of getting them set up to do the work. But it can be improved and streamlined, which is certainly what some of you called out earlier when I asked you what you wanted to get out of today. So there are ways we can make this better and easier. Broadly speaking, we tend to be able to pay our people on time and have their documents signed. So that doesn't tend to be most people's top of mind concern. Now, what we want to avoid, or what will show that our compliance step of onboarding isn't working, are things like employees getting paid incorrectly or late. No surprises there. There's some research out of Australia, I think it was, which said that it only takes 2 mistakes in someone's pay. So maybe a late pay 1 week, a few weeks later, maybe they weren't paid quite right for the hours they worked. It only takes 2 incorrect pays for someone to start thinking about looking for work elsewhere. I really like my job, but I wouldn't show up if I wasn't getting paid, which is true for many, many, many of us who are employees. So getting paid correctly and on time is critically important. And so having those processes set up is I can't stress enough how critical it is to get it right. If an employee can't do the job because their tools or their system access is late, that's pretty frustrating. If their reporting lines are unclear, they're not sure who actually their boss is, that's a pretty major oversight. If communication is confusing or unclear, maybe they've been given different expectations about what to do and how it all works. Or if they don't know how to escalate or ask for help, that can be a really fatal piece in your compliance side of things too, because they are going to have the most questions in their first few weeks and their first few months. If they don't know where to go with those, it can be very, very difficult for them to feel like they have what they need to do their job and get their job done. Now, I wanted to talk about something here quickly, and I'm going to be sounding a bit academic, but I think it will make sense when we get into it. So Hertzberg two-factor theory is an academic way of thinking about what we care about at work. So hygiene factors reduce satisfaction in the workplace. If they're there, you kind of don't notice. Like when you walk into a workplace, you don't go, they definitely have vacuumed the carpet. I can see that their kitchen is clean. Like, it's just kind of the stuff that you sort of expect to be there. So if those hygiene factors aren't present, if the kitchen is filthy, the toilets stink, there's food scraps on the carpet everywhere, you notice when they're not there, and that will increase your job dissatisfaction. But having them in place doesn't make you happy. It just kind of brings you to a bit of a neutral state in terms of its impact on your motivation and what you care about. Motivation factors are things that, when they are there, improve satisfaction, right? So they relate to job satisfaction, not dissatisfaction. If you don't have them, people won't be mad, as compared to if you're not paying people, they will be very mad. But having them in place will improve satisfaction. And it's things like feeling recognized, feeling a sense of achievement, having promotion opportunities, having opportunities for personal growth, all that side of things. So when you're thinking about what matters during an onboarding process, pay attention to both. If you have amazing motivation factors, like perhaps you have a foosball table, you've got great development opportunities, the office is beautiful and has views over the Wellington Harbour, but your hygiene factors are not there. So stuff's always late. It takes weeks to get anything approved in terms of getting a laptop or a mouse and keyboard for your new starter. The office is beautiful, but it's kind of grubby and there's never enough paper for the printer. No matter how many motivation factors you have in place, if the basics aren't there, people are going to be dissatisfied and you're not going to get the benefit. So have a think about both of those when you're updating or designing your onboarding program. We talked about compliance. Let's talk about clarification. Going beyond the basics and knowing what's expected of you at work. So my first piece of advice always is to set objectives for the onboarding program. Sometimes it can feel a bit uncomfortable being so explicit with what we want to see from this employee, because if we say, here's what success looks like, we're obviously implying that not hitting those milestones will mean failure or will mean that they aren't succeeding. But actually, if employees know what's expected of them, that clarification is enormously useful. I will often say that being clear is being kind. And so you're actually being helpful by saying clearly what your milestones are, rather than leave an employee to think that they're smashing it and doing the best job ever, only to find out 6 weeks in that actually they're way behind the 8 ball and are not doing what's expected of them. So some of these objectives might include things like confidently walk a prospect through a sales demo by week 4. That comes from one of MyHR's onboarding plans for our sales team. Another example for someone in retail could be to be able to independently close and open the store by week 8. That's a really clear objective. If someone works in customer support or customer success, if they are expected to independently be able to resolve all tier 1 requests by week 12, name that and call that out so that they know what it is that they're working towards. Setting objectives is a really helpful tool because you are being clear about what the milestones are and employees can then work towards them. This is also really helpful if you then need to go through and do something like exercise a 90-day trial period. If you have clearly set objectives and clearly communicated those to your employee, and your employee has not met those objectives, it'll be really easy to then say to them, look, you're actually not cut out for this kind of work. I haven't seen the improvement I've needed from you. You haven't met these milestones. I'm going to be proposing ending your employment under the trial period because you're not fit for the work. If you don't have such clear expectations, your employee sort of understandably can push back a bit and say, well, I was never told what was expected. I've been doing what's been asked of me every day and I've had no complaints. So what do you mean I'm not cut out for the role? But if you had some mental outcomes you wanted to see, or some mental milestones that they haven't hit, you can't terminate based on what's in your head because it wasn't communicated to the employee. Also, as part of the clarification piece, this is where you can start getting your employee used to receiving feedback at work. So strengths and opportunities for development are a key part of kind of flagging to our staff where they stand, I guess. So you might want to say to someone, I've noticed that you're really careful to follow up with tasks that you've been set. And if you're not getting the information you need from your colleagues, you're really good at following up. That's awesome. I really appreciate your attentiveness and your ability to kind of get things done. That's really cool. You might say to someone, I've noticed you've got a very warm and personable phone manner, which is lovely. I really enjoy hearing you on the phone to clients because you do such a wonderful job of handling them. So you've clearly got some great customer success skills, which is great to see. On the flip side, you might need to say to someone, my expectations are that internal messages or emails are responded to within 3 to 4 business hours, and this isn't happening. Here are some examples from last week where it took you 2 or 3 days to go back to your colleagues who are messaging you, who are trying to get in touch. This isn't meeting my expectations, so this will need to improve going forward. What support do you need for me to get there? Are there any reasons that I'm not aware of that might mean it's a bit trickier for you to meet this expectation? But having these conversations will be missed if you don't put the time into thinking about what it is you're expecting of your employee, and then thinking about what you're observing that is helpful in terms of their skill and their competency, or what is less helpful in terms of things that they might need to put some attention into. Critically, when a new person joins the business, they are at a significant power disadvantage compared to the manager or people who've been there for a long time. So it is on you as the business owner, as the manager, as the key contact for this person's onboarding process to keep your channels open for questions and feedback. You need to be the one reaching out and explaining to them how they can get in touch. You need to be the one booking meetings. You need to be the one asking them, is there anything that you need? You'll have to invest a bit of time into building their trust that they can come to you and building their understanding of what's expected in terms of communication. Expecting a new employee to do that when they have no idea what the standard is or no idea how the business operates is almost a guaranteed recipe for a difficult onboarding period. Now, the third C here is about connection. So we are all very, very social creatures, although obviously some of us are more extroverted or more introverted, but having meaningful connections at work is really important, both to productivity, but also to employee retention and to employees' a sense of resilience when it comes to work stresses or work setbacks. So the first person or the person a manager will have, a new employee will have the most contact with is going to be their manager. So what you need to be thinking about as a manager is, what regular check-ins have you set? Can you be available to support them and ask questions? Clear time in your schedule, check in with them. If you are going to be hiring at a really, really busy time, that's okay. Who are you delegating to be this person's kind of first point of contact? What are the supports you're putting in place to support this person when you can't be available because you're traveling or have a major project you're going to have to be neck deep in and can't always spare the time? So these connective pieces are really important. And as the manager, you have the most power to build your own relationship with this person, but also to set them up for success with connections with others, which brings us onto their team. So make sure you've done a team introduction of some kind. If you have a buddy system, that's awesome. Make sure that they're clear who their buddy is and what the role of a buddy is there to do. Share org charts, book a morning tea if they need to shadow team members to kind of see what it is that that person does, because it's important that your new employee knows for their role kind of what that person's role in their world is. All of that kind of stuff, again, will take a bit of time and a bit of effort to set up, but it means your employee will feel much more quickly bedded in and will feel much more connected to their colleagues, who can then be your backstop if you're not available and they have questions, but also can be the foundation for really, really strong work relationships, which again are important in terms of people being able to do their job, but also feeling good about and knowing how to sustainably do their jobs so they don't get too stressed or overworked. Sometimes there are some key roles in the business people need to be aware of. This might be the head of another department that they're going to be interacting with closely. This could be suppliers who they're going to be interacting with. Obviously, customers are a really key stakeholder. So figure out what the best way to kind of get them to touch base with those different critical relationships are. It doesn't have to be long. It can be a 20-minute conversation. It can be that person just coming to your next meeting with them to put a face to a name and sort of figure out what the dynamic is, but make sure that your employee knows who their key stakeholders are so that they can be thoughtful about choices they make when communicating or making decisions or engaging with them. And then you sort of have this category that I couldn't think of a different word for apart from helpfuls, but it's you know when you see them, it's the office manager who's been there for 15 years and knows where every single piece of stationery could possibly live. It's long-serving members of the team who have institutional knowledge that might be really helpful context for your new employee when they're dealing with this particular weird customer who had a bunch of things happen 3 years ago that they're still a bit grumpy about, but the new employee kind of has to know about that to know about this new customer. Just generally helpful people. So if there are people that you know show up and are useful to know in your business, make sure you're introducing your new starter to them so that they can be reaching out to those helpful kind of members and colleagues as they need to.
Kia ora. Apologies for the abrupt change in format and audio. If you attended the webinar last week, you'll know that we had some audio and technical difficulties. So what we've decided to do is to re-record the end of the webinar from this point onwards so that we can get you the content that was really difficult to hear, as well as the demo and a couple of questions. So any questions about this content, you're very welcome to email in and get in touch. But thank you for bearing with us as we got our audio issues sorted. So moving on to the next section here, we're talking about culture and engagement, which is the last of our 4 C's model of onboarding. I think sometimes HR people or the HR industry can overcomplicate culture and what it is that it means when we're talking about culture. But really simply, it's how we do things around here. Do we wear jandals in the office, or do we have to wear kind of professional shoes? Is it appropriate to swear on a webinar or to use informal language with our clients? Do we have drinks on a Friday afternoon or a Tuesday afternoon? How do we do things around here? So at the very kind of top of the culture pyramid is the organization's vision, mission, company values, that kind of thing. Now, if you have a documented set of values, that's awesome. You definitely want to be sharing these with your new hire so they understand what the context is. If you don't, it might just be a 10 or a 15-minute conversation to give them the story of the business. How did the owners decide to start the business up? Did it used to be a different brand and then maybe you got bought by a larger organization and you've merged your branding? Whatever the story of what it is that you're here to do, your mission, any company values, this is where you want to be sharing them with your new starter to help set expectations about what isn't okay in terms of how we behave at work. Behavior and beliefs, again, these might not be perfectly captured by your values or by your mission statement, but anything around this is how we do things, here's what we don't do. We use te reo Māori in our email communications, for example, or it's really important that your language is really informal because that's part of our irreverent branding. Whatever the behaviors are that need to be, that you're expecting your new starter to demonstrate, this is when you start talking about them. And be prepared to give feedback. It's really common, especially as an employee joins the business, for there to be a little bit of guidance or checking around, are they kind of operating in the lane that you're expecting them to? So be prepared to say, hey, it was really cool to see you step up in that particular meeting. Heads up that because we have to be really tight with our meeting minutes because we're a not-for-profit that has reporting requirements and obligations, the next time you want to raise something in a meeting, it does need to be added to the agenda beforehand because that's how we do things around here. So be prepared to give feedback if your new starter isn't displaying just yet clear kind of behaviors that align with the business. You're not criticizing them, no one's in trouble. You're just giving them some feedback so that next time they can be more intentional or more deliberate about how they are conducting themselves. So yeah, a couple of examples. Great that you put your hat in the ring to pick up that project, or next time I'd like to see you take more ownership of whatever it was that they were suggesting. And role modeling is really important. You can't be what you can't see. And so you as the manager or the coordinator for this new employee is going to need to walk the talk in terms of demonstrating the company behaviors and values that you want to be seeing. If you have a value around teamwork or collaboration or working together, and the first thing the new starter hears is all of their colleagues having a massive bitch and a whinge about a particular customer, or if it's really clear that people are quite protective of their territory and it's quite hard to work together across different teams if you've got a project you're working on, that's really going to undermine the good work that you're trying to do and the expectations you're trying to set of this person, because what they're seeing is not what they're being told. And so be really careful about the behavior that you and your team are demonstrating, particularly as this new person gets onboarded. Now, we come to remote onboarding. So bringing an employee on board is harder but not impossible. And I think the key thing to understand is that this is a really common problem that employers in New Zealand are dealing with. So 69%, more than 2/3 of small and medium enterprises in New Zealand offer some kind of flexible work arrangements. So it's really common for people to be having colleagues join the business or join their team that they might not yet have met in person. What this means is the tools that you have to onboard them are more limited, right? So you don't have any face-to-face contact with them, which is part of that connection piece to consider. There are no informal water cooler chats, again, playing into that connection piece. And there's a really high level of trust required that goes both ways. You have to trust that this employee isn't just going to be sitting at home doing their laundry, watching YouTube all day. And they have to trust that you're going to take care of them and make sure they have the tools and the context needed to get started and do their job. So we can see that the compliance piece, normally easy to take care of. People are very used to, signing policies and reading employment agreements and using online pay tools, for example. But it's the people side of things where onboarding remotely can be tricky. The good news is that the principles of good onboarding very much remain the same, right? And so there are some things that we can do or some different strategies we can use to make sure that we're ticking off these connection and culture pieces, which again are harder to do when an employee is being onboarded remotely. So some of the tools that you have, I think it would be important to note that a little bit of effort here will address most of the issues that you're dealing with. It's impossible to perfectly replicate an in-person onboarding experience for a remote employee, but you don't have to do that. You're not aiming for perfection or aiming to replicate. You're aiming to deal with as many of the issues as you can so this person has what they needed to get started in the role. So make sure you've got clear documented expectations, especially of what you're expecting of them in the first few days and first few weeks in terms of their output. Book in regular calls between yourself and this new employee if you're the one supporting them, or their buddy if that's the person who's going to be kind of the key contact. Book virtual calls to other colleagues. Again, you're still connecting them to the people they need to know. You're just managing it with a different tool because you can't just book a meeting room and put everyone in there to say hi. Critically, it might be helpful to document some unspoken practices in the workplace. One example that I've worked through with a client was they had an employee who came from a much bigger corporate environment where meeting calls or virtual calls, I should say, often had dozens and dozens of participants. So they were very used to having their camera off in those calls because it's just overwhelming having like 20 people all with their face displayed on a call. And when they moved to this smaller employer, that was really odd because their colleagues, there would only be 3 or 4 of them in a meeting, would often have their cameras on. And so this new starter would often have their camera off. Not a problem, but you can see how it would create a bit of friction. Maybe the colleagues or the existing team members would find it a bit hard to connect with this new starter. So explaining to them that the practice in this business is to have our cameras on unless there's a different reason for it, means you're just reducing that point of friction, which might cause, which might just be a little bit of a ripple effect in the culture of the team that you're trying to integrate this new person into. Where you can, I do recommend booking smaller lunch catch-ups between 2 to 3 people. Again, it's really hard to have meaningful, engaged conversation when there's 20 of you on a call. If you can have some one-on-one social time or some, a 3 people kind of smaller conversation, that's going to be easier for your new starter to get to know their new colleagues and also for the colleagues to get to know the new starter rather than putting them on display like someone who needs to be interrogated by a whole bunch of people. And if you can, do Friday or Tuesday drinks, whatever, it doesn't have to be Tuesday, but it's some social time where everyone can get together. If there are some online games that you can play together, like telephone, or if there's some, longer term strategy games that can become a bit of a regular thing, book in time to make sure that there is a bit of social time for everyone to hang out, because again, you're not going to get that experience when this person works in Whakatane and your head office is in Wellington. When we come to using tech, tech is a really amazing tool for a few things. There are some things that technology and platforms can do really well to make onboarding easier. So let's use the tools available to us to make this an easier process rather than relying on our overworked managers or our overworked selves, if we're the ones onboarding, to get it right all the time. Computers are really smart at some things, so let them do some heavy lifting. And when I say smart at some things, I mean things like consistency. If you tell a platform or a system to send you a reminder every 2 weeks about something, the computer will absolutely do that. You're not going to have your assistant or your office manager forgetting to do it because they just were overwhelmed with a whole bunch of other stuff. Things like alerts and reminders, tracking of progress towards outcomes or metrics, making sure all of your compliance things are taken care of, e-signing of documents, digital training or training videos. All of these are things that tech platforms can be really useful for because they are able to manage this in a way that takes the thinking component off your plate. It can be really easy to forget a particular company policy if you're rushed and just trying to print things off from a folder really quickly. Trying to remind yourself to catch up with your new starter every week is not always reliable. So use platforms and use computers to do what they're good at. So to provide that foundation for a really meaningful onboarding program so that you can do the personal stuff around connection, culture, and all that side of things that is computers can't replace, only a human can take care of. Now, we have a really fabulous onboarding module that does a lot of this work for you. So I'm going to jump out of this presentation quickly and then jump into the short product demo, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. So you've logged into your MyHR account and we want to click on onboarding on the left-hand side. Now, this is where your templates live for your onboarding plans. What we want to do is make it really easy, for example, if you have a large sales team who are going to have consistent onboarding requirements like training on the product or the platform that they're demonstrating or signing off on their commission scheme, any of that kind of stuff. You can have a template that's very similar that you can then tailor to each new starter. The same with the warehouse team. Your warehouse folk are going to have different tasks for their onboarding than your sales team are. So set up different templates to use for different people or different teams in your business. Now let's have a look at an onboarding template that is live. So we're going to have a look at Ashley's template here, or Ashley's onboarding plan, I should say. And this is what a live onboarding plan looks like. So you can see that within the onboarding plan are different sections here. So we can set up activities or actions for before the employee starts. We can then have sections for day one and then for week one, for as long as you like, for as many weeks or as many months as you like. Typically onboarding plans go for anything between 8 and 12 weeks, so sort of 2 to 3 months, but it's not uncommon to have onboarding plans go for up to 6 months because we acknowledge that although a lot gets done in those first 3 months, it can still take a minute for new employees to really find their feet, and so providing them that support for an extra few months can be quite useful. So let's mark this task as complete. I'm going to click on the task. I'm going to mark it as complete. I'm going to add a comment saying Sylvie has emailed the PPE provider and requested all necessary items for Ashley. Should be arriving next week. Cool. And so that activity then just lives as a little comment here on the bottom so we can track anything that we need to about these different tasks. Now, you can see here that these tasks are assigned to different people. So Ashley will have some tasks for herself to complete. So sign her employment agreement, review policies, review any training materials. And we can also assign tasks to other people who are important in the onboarding process. So Peter could be her manager. We could also assign tasks to the office manager, for example, if they're the one who's going to be ordering equipment for our new starter. And potentially we have actions in here for the employee's buddy as well. The person who's going to be most closely working with them, who will be able to answer kind of questions on the day-to-day, and who will probably collaborate with the employee's manager to make sure that their onboarding is going well. So that's a very quick demo here. Thank you for bearing with me. If we jump back into our presentation, we are at the end and we can talk about bonus resources. So for everyone who attended the webinar, in your follow-up email, you'll be getting a few things. One, you'll be getting a copy of these slides so that you have access to the material later. You're very welcome to share these within your business. If they end up on LinkedIn or Instagram, that might be a problem, but feel free to share them with anyone you think might find them useful. We'll also be sending you an onboarding checklist for you to have a think about whether there are some activities missing in your onboarding process. Again, the art comes in tailoring this to that particular role or that particular team or to your particular organization. So it's not a complete resource, but the intention is just to get you started and to make sure you're at least ticking off most of those compliance pieces and ticking off most of the basics. And you will also have access to a link to book a complimentary 20-minute conversation with me. If you are an existing MyHR client, that's awesome. I love reconnecting with clients. You're very welcome to book some of my time. If you are not a MyHR client and something we've talked about today has sparked a thought for you or sparked something you want to discuss further, just book in some time with me. I'm an HR person, not a salesperson, so you won't be getting a hard sales pitch from me. If there is an opportunity for us to have a meaningful conversation about whether MyHR could be a support to your organisation, I might suggest you get in touch with our sales team. But if it is just a conversation to bounce some ideas around or talk about something that's come up today, that's a great use of our time, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you for bearing with us, especially last week when the audio was horrific and not a good time. Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry we couldn't fix it on the day. But in terms of questions, there were a few pieces that came through from people who were there on the day. And the first of those questions was, can we use trial periods if an employee or a new starter is on a work visa? So the answer is yes, you can. Now, if you have an employee on an accredited employer work visa, you will not be able to use a trial period because it's unlikely the visa will get approved. However, if you have an employee who is, or a new starter, I should say, who is not on an accredited employer work visa and the conditions of their visa don't mention anything about trial periods, you're welcome to go ahead and use them. Remember that you can't use them for an employee who's worked for you before as an employee. You have to have the clause noted and written down explicitly in your employment agreement. The employee has to have had fair and reasonable time to review the agreement, which is typically anything from 2 to 5 business days. And they also have to have signed the employment agreement before starting work. So if they start work on a Monday, agreement has to be signed by both parties no later than the Sunday before. So thank you for the person who sent that question through. In terms of the other question we had, which was about using the MyHR onboarding module, the question was, can we set up reminders in the onboarding plan to go to the people who have tasks assigned to them? This person was sick of chasing up their new starters and their managers to get tasks completed. And so the answer is yes. If your employees have self-service access enabled, and if your managers have access to the management side of the account, then any tasks that you create for them in an onboarding plan will trigger email reminders, chasing them up and reminding them of what they have to do for this onboarding plan. You shouldn't have to be chasing them manually. That's something that systems and computers are really good at doing, right? Is they're good at following up and sending email reminders. So as long as you have assigned those tasks to the correct people and they have login access to MyHR, yes, you'll be able to automatically have email reminders sent to those people, reminding them to give the health and safety tour or reminding them to sign the company policy about use of company vehicles. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to drop me an email. It's on the screen there, sylvie@myhr.works. If you wanted to book in some time to have a conversation with me about anything that's come up today, again, you're very welcome to. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. I hope there was some useful content in there for you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.